What are horror movies concerned with more than anything else? Death. Duh. And generally speaking, they aren't shy about showing their rosters of unlucky meat puppets being hacked apart by the fearsome killer. To that point, it is always best to assume that a character survives unless you unambiguously glimpse their dead, mutilated body, but all the same, characters sometimes disappear so uneventfully that it's easy to forget they actually made it to the end at all. So that being said, I'm Jem from WhatCulture.com, and these are the 10 horror movie characters you didn't realise actually survived. Number 10. Brian in Valentine. 2001's cult classic slasher Valentine toots a solid body count, but you might have missed the character who actually wasn't among the dead. During the climactic Valentine's Day party, Paige, played by Denise Richards, is invited upstairs by Slimeball Brian, played by Woody Jeffries, who has a surprise to show her, that surprise being his penis. Brian then begs a thoroughly unimpressed Paige to wax his penis, prompting her to go the hyper-literal route by tying him to the bed and straight up pouring hot wax all over his exposed genitals. The last we see of Brian, he's cursing Paige's name while writhing helplessly on the bed. And though not long after this a massacre unfolds in the very same house, we're never given any indication that Brian is among the victims, even though he would have been an easy pickings for the killer. But Brian is a fundamentally minor character whose existence we're never invited to care one a lot about. And so it's easy to completely forget about him in the moment he disappears from the movie, even if his heart is still presumably beating when the end credits roll. Number 9. Maggie BESS in 13 Ghosts. If you turned off 13 Ghosts the moment that the Criticus family embraced and the movie faded to black, you missed out on a hilarious final stinger, which confirmed the survival of one of the movie's best characters. The family's nanny, Maggie, played by Radiga, is seemingly killed in the film's climax when she helps trigger the destruction of the haunted ghost-filled house. But if you stick around for a few seconds after the fade to black, Maggie's shown emerging from the house's rubble, where she hilariously declares that she's quitting her nanny job and she's heading on the first effing plane back to Newark, just before the main credits roll. Given that Maggie straight up endangered herself to save the family, who also happen to be her wealthy employers, it's far more satisfying that she survives than simply being forgotten about amid the rubble. But anyone who walked away the second the movie seemed to be over surely missed out on this delightful final reveal. Number 8. Deputy Carl Hartman in Texas Chainsaw 3D. Though Texas Chainsaw 3D ends with the primary villain, corrupt Mayor Bert Hartman, played by Paul Ray, being fed into a meat grinder by newly christened anti-hero Leatherface, played by Dan Yeager, the movie's secondary antagonist actually slyly gets away scot-free. While initially presented as an affable character and even a romantic prospect for protagonist Heather, played by Alexandra Daddario, Bert's son Carl, played by Scott Eastwood, eventually shows his true colours. In the third act, Carl ties a scantily clad Heather up in the abandoned Sawyer slaughterhouse in an attempt to lure Leatherface. But before the chainsaw-wielding maniac arrives, Bert tells his son to leave. And that's the last we ever see of him. Despite the expectation that Leatherface would clean house in the finale, he only slaughters Carl's father, perhaps because the filmmakers envisioned Carl returning for a sequel. A sequel which, per the film's mediocre box office performance, ultimately never came to pass. Carl admittedly isn't the most memorable of characters, but given that his father just got murdered by Leatherface, he would have surely been keen to track his killer down and enact the same bloody revenge. Number 7. Ted Bowen in Friday the 13th, Part 2. Amid Friday the 13th Part 2's sizable body count, it's easy to forget about the fate of the movie's jokester character Ted Bowen, played by Stu Charno. For as much as Ted seems like a card-carrying future victim for Jason Voorhees, played by Steve Dash, he unexpectedly survives the film's events, even if he does so in rather surreptitious fashion. During the movie, Ted leaves the training camp near Crystal Lake and heads to a bar where he gets thoroughly drunk, enough that he can't drive himself back to the camp. The last time we see Ted in both the movie and the franchise as a whole, he talks about finding a motel in the town to sleep off the brew, and that's that. While it's obvious that Ted wasn't killed by Jason, given that he was never seen returning to the camp, it's also easy to take his continued existence for granted, given how suddenly he just disappears from the movie. And like that, Ted's fondness for a few beers ended up saving his life. Number 6. FELIX, Professor Solomon in Urban Legends Final Cut. As with 13 Ghosts, you need to be a pretty quick trigger with the remote control to miss this one, but it's still absolutely possible. Urban Legends Final Cut ends with the killer revealed to be Professor Solomon, played by HARTMAN, and just as he lunges to kill protagonist Amy, played by Jennifer Morrison, she shoots him clean in the chest, apparently killing him. The final scene then reveals that Amy directed a film based on her experience, Urban Legends, after which the end credits seemingly roll. However, after a couple of seconds, we pull back to see that the movie isn't quite over yet. Rather, being watched by a hospitalized, possibly vegetative, but definitely still alive Solomon, who is being wheeled around the facility by none other than Brenda Bates, played by Rebecca Gayheart, the villain from the original Urban Legend. Needless to say, if you turned the movie off the second you saw white on black credits, you missed out on the most worthwhile and entertaining part of the entire film. Number 5. Steve in Hellraiser. Kirsty Cotton, played by Ashley Lawrence, her deranged family, and Pinhead, played by Doug Bradley, are such memorable characters in the original Hellraiser that it's incredibly easy to forget that Kirsty also had a boyfriend sidekick existing on the periphery. That boyfriend is Steve, played by Robert Hines, an absolute personality vacuum of a character who has basically negative screen presence, enough that he's almost never mentioned in discussions of the classic horror film. In fact, even if you remember him, you might forget that he does indeed survive the first movie and is seen standing outside the destroyed remnants of Kirsty's home alongside her. Yet Hellraiser 2 seemingly appreciated how little audiences cared for Steve, resulting in him being written out with a single cursory line of dialogue when a doctor tells Kirsty near the start of the movie, "Don't worry about him, he's okay, we sent him home hours ago." Ironically, anyone who hasn't seen the first film in a while might simply be left asking, who the hell is Steve? Number 4. Felix and Lucy in Bird Box. Netflix's hit post-apocalyptic horror Bird Box toots such a stacked ensemble cast that you can't really be blamed for failing to keep track of everyone. Case in point, police trainee Lucy, played by Rosa Salazar, and druggy criminal Felix, played by Machine Gun Kelly, are pure polar opposites who, nevertheless, find themselves impossibly attractive to one another, leading to them hooking up amid the carnage. This eventually escalates to the duo deciding to steal the survivors' only remaining car and driving off to parts unknown. This being the last time we ever see them, it's reasonable to assume that they were waylaid by the deadly creature waiting for them outside. But such a fitting demise would surely be something any filmmaker worth their salt would want to show the audience for satisfaction's sake. But in interviews shortly after the movie's release, director Suzanne Bier confirmed that, in her estimation, the pair made it to a nearby grocery store, though reiterated that she liked the ambiguity of audiences not knowing exactly where they ended up. Number 3. Count Dracula in Dracula, Dead and Loving It. Mel Brooks' last film, Dracula, Dead and Loving It, is in no way a good movie, though it does offer up a few unhinged chuckles courtesy of Leslie Nielsen, who plays Count Dracula in the balmy gothic comedy. At the end of the movie, Dracula is accidentally killed by a bumbling Renfield, played by Peter MacNicol, who exposes him to sunlight, causing him to be quickly burned to ash. Seems pretty immutable and unambiguous as deaths go, right? Van Helsing, played by Mel Brooks, even shows up to check Dracula's really dead, apparently allowing him to finally have the last word in their game of one-upmanship throughout the movie. Stick around to the very end of the credits though, and Dracula's voice can be miraculously heard once again, speaking in Moldovan before letting out a cackle. It's in no way made clear how Dracula has apparently been resurrected, but this post-credits gag nevertheless allowed Dracula to have the true last word between him and Van Helsing. Don't try to understand it, just laugh and move on with your life. Number 2. Jimmy in Halloween 2. The original Halloween 2 introduces the character of Jimmy, played by Lance Guest, a paramedic who falls for Laurie Strode, Jamie Lee Curtis, and whose fate is left totally ambiguous in the movie's theatrical cut. Jimmy is last seen about 10 minutes before the end of the film, where he passes out in his car, his head landing on his car horn and alerting Michael Myers, played by Dick Warlock, to his and Laurie's whereabouts. Laurie Laurie promptly exits the car, leaving an unconscious Jimmy in the vehicle with Michael stalking nearby. And even once Michael is vanquished, Jimmy is curiously never seen again. It's easy to forget about Jimmy, or just assume that Michael dealt him a killing blow on his way back to the hospital, especially given that he isn't mentioned in any of the sequels. However, the extended TV cut of Halloween 2 actually ended with Jimmy joining Laurie in an ambulance as the pair hold hands and express relief at their survival. This scene even prompted a fan theory that Jimmy was the father of Laurie's daughter, Jamie Lloyd, played by Danielle Harris, in the original continuity, though there's nothing in the subsequent films which even remotely points to this. All the same, Jimmy's still alive and out there, somewhere. Even if the recent David Gordon Green trilogy effectively decanonised Halloween 2. And number 1, Robert Morse in Alien 3. Everyone remembers that Alien 3 ends with Ripley, played by Sigourney Weaver, sacrificing herself by leaping into the furnace to prevent the xenomorph queen inside her from being born. It's a terrific, epic moment in a wildly divisive film, enough that stunned fans might completely gloss over the fate of the movie's other prominent remaining character. The sole surviving prisoner on Penal Colony Fury 161 is Robert Morse, played by Danny Webb, who, despite being wounded by Wayland Utini goons in the climax, is still alive and kicking in the final minute of the movie when taken into custody. While there are reasonable assumptions to be made that Morse was killed by Wayland Utini after being interrogated, the wider canon confirms that he was ultimately sent to a C-class prison and lived for another 3 decades before dying a natural death. Hell, Morse even wrote a book about his experiences, Space Beast, which was unfortunately banned due to its sensitive nature. And that rounds off our list of 10 horror movie characters you didn't realise actually survived. If you know of any more, then let us know in the comments down below, and while you're there, drop us a like, share and subscribe. I've been Jem from WhatCulture.com, and I'll catch you in the next vid.